Good morning, everyone, or hello, everyone.
Morning.
Um, Welcome to the Back to Basics communication session. Um, my name is Nick Lanson. I'm a postdoc at MIT with Paula Hammond. And then we have two other YSC team members that helped to put this together. One is Rachel Donaghy, who is a postdoc at University of Strathclyde in conjunction with Lameller Biomedical. And the other is Daniel Hassan, who has just finished his PhD at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Um, we're very happy to have everyone here. Um, for a little bit of background, for those of you who might not be very familiar with the Controlled Release Society, or the CRS, it is a professional organization for experts who are dedicated to the predictable and controlled delivery of drugs or cosmetics or other bioactives to their site of action. And it's designed to provide a network of fundamental researchers, development, clinicians, and other industrial folk. Within the Controlled Release Society is the Young Scientist Committee, which is a group of students and early career scientists who are working to provide networking and learning opportunities designed to give newcomers to the field a solid foundation as they move forward with their careers. um, and just as a sort of plug, the annual, or now virtual annual meeting for the Controlled Release Society is coming up at the end of June. And if you like what you see here, there is a lot of young scientist programming that will be part of that. And I believe there are still a couple of days for you to register for that. So you can find all of that on the Controlled Release Society website. For today and for our programming, we will have so first, Professor David Braden is a professor of advanced drug delivery at the School of Veterinary Medicine at University College Dublin. I will give a little bit more in-depth introduction of him later, but he will be speaking to us about the presentation skills that he teaches his trainees and what he thinks will be useful for us as we try to communicate with the academics around us. And then we will have Andrei Svetnik of Sparrow. He's a senior editor at Sparrow, who will be speaking about taking our science and communicating it to a broader audience, most specifically the public. And so just very quickly, before we get started, we do have a message from our sponsor, which is CureVac. I'm going to go ahead and share this.
The story of cure begins at the frontier, and with it, something lies beyond this frontier, transforming consciousness into our discovery. The building block of life, RNA, is able to deliver the body's own blueprint. This was thought just as messenger RNA is needed to convey the health-giving information to the body, there has to be a curve to herald the need and make the breakthrough possible. At CureVac, we see ourselves just that, as messengers. Because RNA technology will revolutionize breakthroughs affect their within every cell. New therapies and defeat illnesses at this cancer, and new vaccines provide protection from infectious diseases faster and more cost efficiently than ever. This will bring health and hope to people all around the world. The revolution. It wasn't us who started. It was our.
All right. So I did get some feedback during that the audio is very quiet. I apologize for that, and so for anyone who is interested, I will play that again at the end of the session and try to tweak some of the audio issues. Um, uh, so for now, we can move forward with our programming. So up first, we have Professor David Braden, who has been at University College Dublin since 2001 and is the author or co-author of over 200 publications and patents. He's on the editorial advisory boards for Drug Discovery Today, the European Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Advanced Drug Delivery Reviews, Journal of Veterinary Pharmacology, and Therapeutics, and the Associate Senior Editor of Therapeutic Delivery. He's held many advisory and organizational positions within the CRS, as well as been elected a Fellow of the CRS and a member of the American Association of Pharmaceutical Sciences and the EU Academy of Sciences. And with that, I will turn over the screen to David.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick and the committee. Can everybody see my slides?
Not yet.
Okay, so the slideshow is up. Hopefully now it's going to, something will happen. Do I need to press share screen myself?
I think so.
Okay.
And then it should let you select the slideshow.
Okay. Okay, is that up?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's the hard bit. So when you give a presentation, they always say the first thing is that you check that the IT is going to be smooth, because then it relaxes you. So I have some more tips about that later. So let me go into slideshow. So again, thanks to the committee for asking me to do this. I've done it at short notice. I'm delighted to do it. I really like the Young Scientist Committee. Over the last few years in CRS, they do a really good job of introducing younger scientists into the workings of the CRS, and also giving them access to the established scientists within the CRS. So I've been a member since, actually it's 1992, so that's a long time. And I've carried out a lot of roles within the CRS and also the AAPS. And part of that is a teaching function, and to try and mentor postdocs and PhDs to be better at their soft skills. So on the bottom part of the slide, I've just got some of my sponsors. If you're interested in medical devices, I'm funded by the Curran Centre for Medical Devices. If you want to look that up, it's a major centre in Ireland working on the device sector. And Science Foundation Ireland also are major sponsors of my research. Okay, so young researchers, giving talks is one of the hardest things we do. When you start out in your career, you're petrified of giving talks. And I can assure you that your boss and your supervisor were petrified as well at the same stage. Because in putting myself in your shoes back in the 1980s, I used to really get scared of giving talks. And really the only way you improve is to practice and give lots of them. So when you see Bob Langer at the CRS, he's been giving talks for 50 years, and he's a really polished performer. And you will see the excitement in his talks, that every talk he gives is fresh. He will be spontaneous. He'll say things about occasional slides that he hadn't planned to. It makes it really exciting. But he didn't get there overnight, and I'm sure that he was the same gibbering idiot that we feel we were starting out as PhD students when we had to give our first talks. So it's not something that's automatic. We have to learn how to do this a lot better. So lots of practice, and you need to present orally as often as you can, and you need to talk to your supervisor and ask for opportunities. Ask them to put you forward, even if you hate giving talks. you still have to look for those opportunities because that's the way you'll get better. So lots of requesting, and of course, when you give a talk, I recognize that many people on this TC, English is not their first language. So it's very important that you try and improve your English as much as possible, because by increasing your vocabulary, it allows you to convey more information about your slides. And it also allows you to respond to questions better in the question time part. And you'll also need to work on your voice and how you project, that you don't get monotone in terms of how you present data, because people get bored if they listen to the same tone all the time. So try and inject a bit of excitement. And you'll see this, if you watch the news, you'll see that people who are talking to camera, they raise and lower their voice all the time. And it's just pure technique, because the human ear is trained to pay more attention if the pitch of the voice moves up and down. Okay, I thought I would have a little bit of fun with you at the beginning. I've got a couple of YouTube links about a very famous footballer, and we're just going to make the comparison between then and now. So in the top one, I'm hoping this is going to open. So I want you to focus on the footballer who's been interviewed for a few seconds, assuming that this is going to work.
So you would probably need to tell Zoom to switch to a different window. So if you go to, I think, New Share, where the share screen button used to be, you can choose the video.
Gary Lineker is joining us now from Sardinia. Live.
Can you see that?
Good to see you, Gary, and congratulations.
We're still on the slides.
A delightful moment for you. But after that...
Okay. Right, so you're on the slide. So what do I do here? I'm going to come out and back to Zoom. Okay, resume share. Anything happening, Nick?
So we see PowerPoint still.
Okay, so how do I get it? If I get into YouTube, then?
So you should be able to hit the share screen button and then select the YouTube window from the options that pop up.
Okay. So this is all the things you should not do in a... Okay, maybe I'm just going to abandon this. Okay.
We can also send out those links.
Do a new share.
Oh.
New share?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, you're seeing the footballer?
Yes. But the sound is off.
And how do? Oh yeah, okay.
I had a bit of a problem with my stomach tonight. I've not been too well in that area for the last few days, and I was getting quite a few bad stomach pains, so they thought it best to probably change me, but there's only a few minutes left anyway.
It never helps, but hopefully you'll be fit for the next one. What was the overall mood? What was the overall mood after?
Well, naturally, we're a bit disappointed. It's not the worst result in the world, of course, but having been in front for most of it.
Okay, so I can go back to the presentation now.
Well, thanks very much.
Are you seeing that?
We see, so now it looks like it's loaded, yes.
Okay, this is the same guy.
Most enthralling of World Cups. 64 games, 171 goals, 20 odd men, kicked the ball around for 120 minutes. And at the end, do I really need to tell you? The Germans won. From all of us here, good night.
Okay, so just go back. Okay, am I back on my PowerPoint now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sorry, that wasn't a great experience for me. I don't know how it was for you. So this is the joys of Zoom and not knowing quite what's going to happen. But I think you got the gist. So that was the same presenter 30 years ago when he was a footballer. And you'll see the first time he talks to camera, he's really boring. And he is a monotone and he's nasal and he's got no expression whatsoever. And then you saw him again from just a couple of years back. He's now one of the most famous presenters on BBC in England. And you see he's slick, he's witty, he's changing his tone, and he's totally relaxed. And that's the difference between you as a maybe a first year PhD student and Bob Langer after 40 years of experience. So just think of your supervisor, that your supervisor was probably a really poor presenter, just like you at a certain stage of your career. So it is all about practice and you will get better. Okay, so when we plan an oral presentation, we need the rules of good PowerPoint, and I've already broken them here by probably having too many bullets. And they say you shouldn't have more than 5 bullet points in a slide, and your slide should be really uncluttered and visual. And if you're going to use alternative media like I just did, and you see that it nearly backfired, it needs to be very relevant. So I hope that example was relevant and that you'll remember it. And of course, you need to make sure that the media works in your presentation. And I had no time to practice this in Zoom, so therefore there was a hitch. And that's never nice for either me or the receivers. The other thing about Zoom, we've all had to learn to give these types of presentation, and we're not looking at anybody. And I actually thrive when I'm in a room giving a talk. When I see people in the eye, I get energized by that, and I can feel the feedback in the room, and I can feel if people are engaged. But with Zoom, I've no idea. So it's a really empty kind of experience, and it's quite hard to maintain energy. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Graham Norton. So he's a very familiar presenter again on the BBC, and he's got great comedian aspects to him. He's an interviewer, and he thrives on an audience. But recently, we've seen him doing Zoom chats to individual stars and writers, and he is totally lame and he's bored, and he just cannot feed in the same way at all. So we thrive when we have an audience there, or we should try and build to that point where we are actually going to give a better presentation when we've got people in the room, because we want them to pay attention to us. And of course, you don't read your slides. So again, we think if we read a slide that is going to be like a safety net for us, but it's rather boring for everybody because we can all read the slide, and we'd really like you to be talking around your slide a bit more, and that involves practice. And of course, if you are worried with PowerPoint, we've always got the notes tool for backup, points that you want to make about the slide. You'll have it on your laptop, and you can always just have a quick glance over if you want to get tips. Okay, so some of us will be giving 10-minute talks and 40-minute talks. Which do you think is the easier? So if you're in the room with me, you could tell me. If anybody wants to put in a reaction to that, which do you think is the easier, 10 minutes or 40 minutes? I'll give you a chance to vote.
A lot of 40 minutes in the chat.
Yes, 40 minutes is easier.
A few 10 minutes.
This is because with a 40-minute talk, you have more room to play and develop ideas, and you can make more mistakes. Whereas with a 10-minute talk, which generally is what students might get at the CRS if they're lucky, you've really got to be pointed. Every slide should count. Every word you say should count, because you're time limited. So I hate giving 10-minute talks. I much prefer giving longer ones where I have room to relax a bit more. Oh, is that me? And then if you want to practice your talk now with PowerPoint being so good, oh dear. With PowerPoint being so good, we can get narration. I wonder how we've been hacked, Nick.
It does appear that someone.
Right. What should we do here? Maybe I should come out of the presentation.
Yeah, for now.
Okay. Right, we'll just go back to Zoom.
Okay, so I have removed who I believe was the person doing that. Oh, nope, it's still...
Well, do you know something? I don't need these slides. So maybe I'll just talk. Is that the best thing?
Sure.
I think that's better. So let's stop that. Okay, well, that's again, well, you never know what's going to happen in a talk, guys. So that's the first experience I've ever seen of a hacking on a Zoom. Anyway, we'll continue. So with giving a PowerPoint presentation and so on, you should use the narrate part of PowerPoint when you're practicing your talk. So do you remember our supervisors used to tell us to practice to a mirror or practice to your class? But in fact, you can practice to PowerPoint and narration, and you can listen back. And it's an excruciating thing to do, by the way, to listen to yourself on PowerPoint narration. But you sort of get over it, and I think it's a very good thing to do. And every academic in the world is now using PowerPoint narration and is listening to themselves in that way. So I think that grad students and postdocs preparing for presentations in conferences, they should be doing that too. I think it's a very good way to prepare. So with your practicing, practice it to a point where you're very comfortable with your material, but maybe don't over practice, because you still want to have an element of spontaneity in your talk so that it creates excitement for the receiver. So if it's so rehearsed and it looks like it's all been read and every line is rehearsed, it's not a great look. So what I'd say is rehearse it to a point where you're comfortable, but leave room that you can still talk around your slides. So and also with your supervisor, of course, you ask your supervisor to check over your slides. And then you're going to practice with your lab group and with your supervisor ahead of a conference to make sure that you're really performing pretty well. Okay, so when you go then to prepare your presentation, you should time your talk and you shouldn't put too many slides in. So everybody puts far too many slides in. So what I would say is that you should practice for maybe 1 slide per minute or 1 slide for 2 minutes. And that can be very helpful. And of course, you spell check and you make sure that your slide looks good, that you don't have fonts in different colors and different sizes and so on. So consistency makes the whole talk look better. Okay, so the basic rule of any good talk is the oldest rule in the book is you tell them what you're going to say, you say it, and then you tell them what you've said. And that's exactly what Bob Langer will be doing at CRS. He uses that technique all the time. And by doing that, it keeps you on message and it keeps your audience very focused and you don't drift off into side issues. So it's very effective. And I think for grad students, particularly, I think in a 10-minute, 15-minute presentation, I would go by those rules. Okay. And then another rule is apparently you don't build suspense and then you try and unveil a surprise ending. So it's better to be consistent through your talk and you're on message, you're telling them what you're going to tell them and so on. Whereas if you present like a magician and you have this big ending, sometimes that can really backfire. So Nick, do you think I should try to share screen again?
Yeah, so I have locked the meeting so that no one new can join. So as long as everyone here is who we think they are, we should be fine.
Okay, I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint again. Okay. So are we sharing screen now?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, look, I'll just continue then. So when we're giving a talk, let's start my video, okay. So is that working, Nick?
We can see you.
Right, so how do I get the share screen going again?
Oh, do I?
Okay, hold on. Share screen. And here we are. Okay.
Yep, so now we can see the PowerPoint again.
Okay, all right. This is certainly an interesting presentation.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. Right. So logical animations can be good. You can see the illogical ones that I did earlier. Limiting your bullets. And if you're going to put sound in a presentation, you need to make sure that it's going to work in the IT that you're using in the room of the conference. So lots of practice. I've gone through the basic rules about a good presentation. And then the last point, be careful with humor. So I've been at presentations where they've been humorous, but they might seem humorous to me as a receiver, but they might not be humorous to everybody in the room because everybody detects humor in a different way, particularly with different international groups in the audience. So be very careful with humor and use it sparingly, maybe at the end. And particularly sarcasm or anything like that, like an Irish person's sarcasm is very different, even from a British person's sarcasm. So we have to be very careful with humor and how we use it in talks. So we're going to tell our story and we're going to give the relevant details. So if you've written a paper, we don't want to hear all about your paper. We just want to hear the really interesting bits and the key figures. Okay. And then good slides versus bad slides. So here's an example. On the left side, the global growth, this is a text slide, and it's pretty boring. And then on the right part, you'll see the bar chart, and that's clearly visually a lot more interesting. And likewise, here is a table. So generally try not to put tables in talks. They're for papers. It's much better to include visual figures. And that's the same data, which is scoped out in a figure, which is much more interesting. And this is the kind of thing that scientists do in talks, including me. I used to do this. We clutter slides with lots of data. And in fact, what's been done here on the left is somebody's just pulled a slide from, I think it's a JBC paper or something very good. And they've taken the legend for it and just put the legend in on the right. And it's awful. And if I'm in the audience and I look at that and say, oh my God, how is someone going to talk me through this slide? So really keep it simple. Have one or two images per slide. And don't just take your figure from the paper and say, that's my figure for the talk. Because who wants to see A, B, C, and D from a panel of figure that's in a paper in a talk? No, you get rid of all the A's and B's and C's, and you actually relabel your figure for a talk, because it's very different from the figure that you would use in a paper, where you've got time to delve into the legend and so on, and spend many minutes looking at that figure in a paper, but you don't have it in a talk. So you need to be using arrows, and you need to be using really clear labeling, and one or two simple ideas, not lots of panels, which can be really confusing. So I think if that's one tip you get out of today, I think that's a good one. Don't clutter your slides with data. Try and put your data in sparingly and then really milk it. And getting your font appropriate is good, and avoid using all capitals. That's horrible. And then a lot of my students will use yellow on a white background, which is horrible in a figure. So dark against light is good. Green against white is awful. So again, when you're presenting data images, make sure that we can see everything in the figure. So if you've got arrows, if you've got error bars, make sure they're visual, and make sure your legends are all very can clearly be seen. And tell the audience what's on your legend, because people, they generally just will show the data and they won't tell the audience what they're measuring. Okay, so a couple of things I do when I'm traveling, or when I used to travel. I generally would print out my talk, because if I'm on a plane or something, or if I'm in a hotel and I don't have the laptop or whatever, I print out 3 slides per page. with the notes part beside it. And generally, I'll really get familiar with each of these slides that I'm going to present. And I'll write down 5 or 6 bullet points around each slide so that I can really talk well around it. So when that slide goes up before an audience, I'm really comfortable with it. And then I'm able to say a little anecdote or a little bit of extra information about each bullet. And that adds a lot of color to a talk, and it's much better than just reading out bullets. So that's something all of us can do in our practice. When we give our presentation at the conference, always look at the room. So scope, who's going to be in the audience, how big is the room. You're going to check your IT ahead of time. So if I was doing this, prepared properly for this, I would have checked with Nick that my Zoom presentation would really convert well and that I could look at those YouTube's images really smoothly. But I didn't do that because I didn't have time to prep, and it backfired. And you need to know who the chair is. So I know Nick, so I had a good idea of how he would manage the session. But if I don't know the chair, I'll always make sure that I introduce myself to them if I'm giving a talk. And I'll also ask them what way they're going to chair the session. And sometimes you'll hit a chair, and I'll meet a chair, and the first thing he'll say to me is, if you run over time, I'm going to cut you off. I've had chairs say that to me. It's a horrible way to begin a session. But of course, keeping to time is very important because the audience hate it and they switch off. And it's rude to the next presenter because you might be cutting away their time. So with your slides, they're there to help you. They're not your life raft. They're there to stimulate you to talk with excitement about your research. And finally, because we're nervous when we give a talk, a good thing is to try and be clear and memorize just the first few lines of your first slide. So particularly with a big presentation, so maybe your PhD Viva, I would always say to my students, just script the first few lines so that it's an icebreaker for you and it puts you at your ease. And then the rest of your slides should just stimulate you to talk with passion about your research. Okay, so Q&A in this part, sometimes it's the most important part of your talk. And it's a bit like a job interview. You can actually prepare very well for it. But a lot of students, and in fact, a lot of academics, industrial scientists, they don't prepare properly for their QA. And they can be standing there like, you know, an animal in the headlights when a good question pops up at them and they're not ready for it. So this is where you're going to use your lab and you're going to use your supervisor to fire good prep questions at you in a Q&A. And it's sometimes the best part of your talk because it shows that you can think on your feet and you might get some great ideas from a good question in the audience. And that might help you write up your PhD research or write up your papers, or you can meet that person afterwards if they've asked you a great question and you only answered part of it. So pick them out afterwards and go and meet them. So that's very useful. And of course, if you don't understand the question, get them to repeat it. Gives you time to think. Make sure they fully ask the question. So don't jump in. So this is a thing I actually do quite a lot, and it's an error. Sometimes I get excited and someone's asking me a question and I actually jump in with the answer before they've actually finished their question. And I'm told it's very irritating. So it's something that I work on, is to just try and hold back and let that person fully get that question out and then think about what I'm going to say in reply to that. And occasionally you will get a corker of a question that you will not have a clue to answer. And what you do there is you'll say, well, maybe I'll have to look that up and get back to you, or maybe we can have a chat over the coffee break. And the main thing is not to spoof or pretend you know the answer. And definitely don't refer back to your supervisor who's in the audience, because we as an audience want you to stand on your own 2 feet. We're not there to hear your supervisor, or we don't want to hear your supervisor bailing you out. They might feel better, but you probably won't, because it's your time. So if you get into an argument, this is the time for the chair to step in, or for you to say, maybe we'll have a chat after, or we'll have a coffee. So prepare well for your Q&A. It's very important. So what can possibly go wrong? So you've just seen it. We've had hackers into my Zoom presentation. I've given many talks over many years. I've never had that, but you have to be prepared for everything. I wasn't very prepared for my YouTube not to work very well, or for the screen sharing not to work well. We'll all get better at that when we get better at doing Zoom presentations. And the one thing I would tell you, I can tell you absolutely securely, is that most talks are fine. The only ones you really remember are the absolutely brilliant ones from a Bob Langer, or the really, really terrible ones where the speaker hadn't a clue or it was a total embarrassment. Or you might remember this one because of the hacker who got in on my slides. Finally, if you're giving posters, it's not the same as giving a talk. You're competing for readers, so it needs to be punchy and it needs to have a very clear message with big fonts. You need to be able to see it from 2 feet, and it's very visual, so very little writing on it. And just remember, at the CRS and other conferences, attendees, they spend about 2 minutes on a poster, and most of them will just look at your conclusions and they might have a quick chat with you. So try and engage them, or maybe ask them to go through, if they'd like you to go through the poster with them. So it's a bit like selling. You really have to get people to buy into your poster, and in a way you have to perform at that. And of course, you never know who's going to show up at your poster. It might be your next employer. Okay, so your Young Scientist Committee had a bunch of questions. Nick, I've probably overrun a bit, so do you want to hold this and maybe the next talk?
Yeah, so we can hold and we can get to Andre, and then we will save Q&A all for the end, if that's okay.
Fine.
Yeah, sorry to everyone about the difficulties that we have had.
Okay, so I need to stop share.
Perfect. And then, yeah, so to introduce then our second speaker, Andre Spetnik joined Sparrow in 2017 with the mission of making science more digestible and more accessible to the public in order to increase trust in science and research. He has a wide variety of expertise and experience as, among other things, a BBC broadcast journalist, a digital copywriter, and a content editor for written, audio, and video media. And so he'll be talking to us about how we can now go out sort of into the public sphere and communicate our science there.
Thank you for the invitation, Nick, and the introduction. And hello to everyone in various time zones. It's really exciting to be with you. This is my first Zoom presentation, so you know, what David spoke about is really relevant to me because it can just go really pear-shaped. I've got lots of windows and tabs open, and I would like to kind of squeeze it into 10 minutes so it's not too complicated and not too boring and not too monotonous. So first of all, I would like to introduce Sparrow, which launched as a startup about 5 years ago. And if I can share my screen, I will show you the Sparrow homepage. Right. So click. Okay, I hope you can see this. This is your non-logged in state. So this is where you land when you're kind of curious about Sparrow. And the way to imagine this, this tool is to think of Google and Pinterest merged into one. So what Sparrow does, it's sort of three pillars. We scrape about 45,000 scientific journals and papers per day. And we grab the metadata and the important stuff from there, the title, the name of the authors, the DOI number, the abstract, and we put it into our database. And then you as a user, as a scientist, you can search in this database and create collections, which we call pinboards. So I'm just trying to move away the window that's obscuring my window. Okay. So this step that I just described to you is what we call aggregation. We basically built up a database of about 60 million papers and patents that you can search through. And the next step is the human input, which is you, the scientist. You can pick the most important papers and put together a collection, which we call pinboard. This process is called curation. And in this process, we actually aid you with a little machine learning wizardry. So we have a kind of a recommendation engine that helps you to find similar papers that you are picking for your collection. And I'm going to show you a collection in a minute. And also an important part is something that helps you in your science communication is the summarization. So here we sort of encourage you and help you when you work with us to explain your science in an accessible way to the layperson. So we try to sort of help you to cut the jargon, structure it into a narrative that's easy to follow and kind of excites the audience and tells them how your research is benefiting humanity. So let me just try to find a few examples of pinboards and digests that we create out of your pinboards. Bear with me because I have to switch windows. Okay, I don't know whether it's visible. 1 second. Okay, so Nick, if you could just let me know whether you can see this. This is an example of a pinboard.
So we are still back on the landing page.
On the landing page. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you might have to go back to the share screen button and choose new share and change it over to the new page. Yes. So artificial sugars and gut microbiome. Oh, so Andre, we've lost your voice now. No. So according to the Zoom software, you are not muted. I don't know. Okay. Still no sound. So we have some suggestions in the chat. Okay. Alrighty. So I think while Andre is gone, David, I might feed you a few questions that came from.
Okay, far ahead, Nick.
Perfect. Okay, so first is so do you know if there's any consensus on using Comic Sans as a font in PowerPoint? On one hand, it's usually portrayed as very unprofessional, but it's also believed to be a lot easier to read for people who suffer from dyslexia.
I've never heard of that. So I think as long as you're consistent with your PowerPoint, I think with your font, it's fine as long as it isn't distracting.
Okay. And then what do you think about, is there a time and place for using cartoons or informal photos in your PowerPoint to demonstrate a purpose?
Yeah, I like them, but you need to be able to make sure you can pull it off because I know John Patton, who's a very famous scientist in CRS, who works on airway delivery. he draws his own cartoons, and they're hilarious, but they also make a point. But look, we're not all John Patton, so I would maybe leave a cartoon to the end. It might be the last thing I'd use in a presentation, but I think if you're going to illustrate a point and it's going to help your story, I think they can be very effective.
And then, oh yeah, that is a good point. So Linda just made the point to me that Andre probably cannot rejoin because the meeting is locked. Oh boy.
Well, do you want to unlock it and allow him to come back? And let's see if we can.
Yeah. So
Maybe
Linda and Rachel, can you keep an eye on people joining and make sure that it is only Andre? And so this question may have been more targeted towards Andre, but David, I think you can comment as well. Do you have any tips on how to keep, especially a general public audience, engaged in a half hour to a 60-minute science talk? They are rare, but they do come up sometimes.
Yeah, certainly our university does a lot of lay talks. That we make our PhDs do thesis in 3. I think a lot of you on this call will be doing those, and it's very, very effective. So we train our students to actually give these kinds of talks, and I think it actually improves their overall science talks when they go back to conveying the message. So I think Andre's back on, maybe, so if maybe we can transfer back to him. He's muted.
Oh yeah, I'm back.
There we go. Perfect.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I had to actually leave the meeting, but then the meeting was locked because of Nikita, our hacker friend, and and it was difficult to get back. But thank you very much for the fast thinking, Nick. So if I can get back to my screen that I was sharing. 1 second, because I got lost it. So I was talking to you about pinboards, which are sort of collections of scientific papers that you can use to weave them into a kind of a narrative and explain what happens to the field and to your research. And I'm trying to share one of these pinboards, one of these screens, but I can't see them on this share screen. So 1 second, I'll just go out of it and try to share it again. And here we go. Okay. I hope I can share it.
Yep.
You can see this. Okay. So this is from one of our US researchers, Linda May Zhang. And as you can see, this is I have to scroll down and slowly explain as we go along. This is research about the gut microbiome and how consuming artificial sugars affects your gut microbiome, which can actually determine whether you sort of fall ill with various cardiovascular diseases. So a healthy gut microbiome, a healthy gut bacteria is actually very important to all of us. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see all the research papers that Linda has collected. And on the left-hand side, you can see the story that we created with her, which is called, on this page, it's called a summary, but we also have a separate page where we call it a digest. And the digest is basically a question and answer format. If you can imagine a sort of a skeptical relative or friend down at the pub or in the coffee house, and you telling them about your research. So the whole idea is that you try to excite them and gradually draw them into this story. So give them just a little bit initially and go easy on the jargon. So as you can see, we broke it up into like very small sections, so it's very easy to digest for the listener or the reader. And we follow a kind of a pyramid structure in our communication. So first we just give you a high level and then a bit more detail. So this is the blurb that's a bit more detail, talking about
Andre, we are still at the title of the pinboard.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So you can't see me scrolling?
No, at least
No.
I can't.
Okay. Right. Maybe I just keep on talking because we lose a lot of time. So basically, okay, I have to describe what's on my screen. We create a sort of a scientific a story and a narrative, and why we do this? Because if you imagine the lay public, they want sort of simple answers and simple explanations of processes. They don't really care much about the little detail that you're researching unless they can see how it fits into the big picture. And the big picture is, in this case, how it benefits humanity, if I can use sort of this kind of expression. Otherwise, they might not be really interested. Also, they want definitive answers that science cannot always give. So this is one of the challenges, you know, that as a scientist, when you're talking to a layperson, how do you convince them that what you're doing is important? So when you cannot give a definite answer, what can you do? You can sort of explain the state of science, the research, the state of the field, and hopefully what we can expect in the future. And why is this important, talking to the lay public? I mean, we are surrounded by all sorts of fake news and pseudoscience. People post all sorts of rubbish, you know, on social media. And if you as a scientist, if you are unable to explain your science, then you kind of giving way to these kind of people who just send around stuff that doesn't have any foundation and creates just misconceptions and suspicion and stuff like that. So this is why we sort of work with you to help you to be able to create stories around science. And going back to the digest, the 3-minute digest that we create, we sort of break it up into a pyramid structure that gently brings you into the detail. So we start with a blurb where we just give a high level explanation. Then we sort of go more into the detail with our in 10 seconds section, where you actually introduce some of the concepts and the notions of the discovery that you're talking about. I'm going to read it out for you because if you can't see. So say the in 10 seconds section says, research suggests your sports drink or sugar replacement can be toxic for your gut bacteria, which regulate how we store fat or feel hungry. Crucially, the mix of these microbes also affects if we develop diabetes or become obese. So from this, you already get the idea about the research. If you're interested, then you keep on reading, and the whole piece is structured in a way that the researcher is answering to sort of the questions of the skeptical partner who's kind of challenging them. And gradually, then you can introduce some of the research data, some of the stats. Further down, sort of we get the question, what is the evidence in humans? You introduce a study that says that people who drank 21 diet drinks per week were twice as likely to be overweight or obese, those who didn't. And there's another study based on over 6,000 adults that showed that people enjoying diet drinks daily were at 36% greater risk for metabolic syndrome and 67% increased risk for type 2 diabetes. So I stopped talking here because, or talking about data, because it's becoming monotonous, and I've learned that. So the whole idea is to imagine that you are talking to your grandma or to your friends and trying to keep them engaged. And basically, this is what we do at Sparrow. Of course, we use it to we are a business, so we use it to our benefit. We engage with companies that need science to build trust with their customers, and we create scientifically based stories that support their activities or their products. One example is we engaged with a major pharma company. We're supplying pinboards to them like this one. You can see they can see the latest scientific papers being published in their field. Or we have created also content for fertility clinics, and that increased their engagement. So more people actually chose their services and became their customers. So basically that's what we do in a nutshell. And I'm ready for questions. I understand that we lost a lot of time, so I'm going to just cut it here. Sorry, I can't hear you again.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andre. So I think so we'll sort of keep the Q&A pretty short to be respectful of people's time. But I think one question that came in is, so do you have any tips on keeping the public engaged when you're giving a talk about, so I guess this is either in a long conversation or if you find yourself presenting to a broader audience? Any suggestions or tips for that?
Well, it's not.
Oh, sorry, Andre, your voice cut out.
Nick, do you want me to come in on that one?
Sure.
I suppose a science talk, it's either one or the other. You're talking to a specialist audience or you're talking to the general public. So they're two entirely different things, and you have to prepare very differently for that. So your message has to be very clear with the general public, and equally you don't want to dumb it down what you're trying to say either. So if you ever have a chance to do radio, that's your chance to do general public communication. And again, how you express yourself and how you portray science research, it's very different to what you would do in for example, a CRS talk.
Got it. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Andre, I don't know if you can hear us, but we lost your sound again. Okay. Are there any more questions people can either put in the chat or raise your hand in the participants window?
Nick, if anyone wants a copy of my presentation, I'm happy to share it.
Okay.
They email me directly. So it's david.braden@ucd.ie.
Okay, perfect. We will make sure people know that. I guess, yeah. So if no one has any more questions, we can just head over very quickly to our thank you slide. So thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you for your patience through our technical difficulties. Big thank you to David and to Andre for being here, especially on short notice. We really appreciate you taking your time to talk to us. The CRS team, a lot of people gave us input and helped us to set this up, which we really appreciate. And again, we were sponsored by CureVac, which I will play the ad for one more time. And otherwise, thank you everyone and have a great day.
Thank you.
The story of CureVac begins at a frontier, and with the idea that something lies beyond this frontier that has the potential to transform not just medicine, but the entire world. Our discovery? The building block of life, RNA, is able to deliver the body's own blueprint for health. This was long considered impossible. Just as messenger RNA is needed to convey the health-giving information to the body, there has to be a messenger, a courier, to herald the new and make the breakthrough possible. At CureVac, we see ourselves as just that, as messengers of the new. Because RNA technology will revolutionize the world, for it takes effect where everything begins, within every single one of us. New therapies will help people and defeat illnesses such as cancer, and new vaccines will provide protection from infectious diseases faster and more cost efficiently than ever before. This will bring health and hope to people all around the globe. The revolution has begun. It wasn't us who started it. It was RNA.